Hello, welcome to Life with Friend. Woo, there you go. I got this. I'm gonna start again. One, two, three. Okay. Hello, welcome to Life with Francy Podcast, a place where you will find all types of conversation like mental health, self-love, self-care, trauma, hobbies, and more. With this podcast, I want to create a place where we support one another in business and personal life. Hope you enjoy this episode. Now, let's get this show started. On today's episode, I have the pleasure to talk to Katie Lail, and then
Mhm.
I said it right. I found her through Podmatch, a great community for podcast hosts and podcast guests to create some amazing collaboration. And today we're going to be talking about family dysfunction and addiction and breaking cycles. So I'm excited to get this conversation started. So, welcome, Katie. Tell us, what is life with you?
Well, life with me is for sure different than it was, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. It's been like an ever evolving process for me. We're talking a little bit today about, breaking that cycle of addiction in families. And, I grew up around addiction. Both my parents struggled with addiction. Following that, I struggled with my own meth addiction, which ended up leading me to federal prison. And so, that was my life. And now my life is so much different. If you were to look at a day in my life today, it's two separate things. It is like a combination of like mothering and maintaining a home, and then the work that I do, which is I work as a peer coach in the peer coaching supervisor for an organization called Face It Together. And we help people who struggle with addiction and who have loved ones who struggle with addiction on their journey to wellness. And so we provide that peer to peer coaching, really being able to share our experience to help somebody else. And we also use science based approaches to get them there. And so that is a huge part of what I do on the day to day. And then, I have a 2 month old and a 2 year old. So that fills up the rest of my time, in addition to having, you know, two Great Danes, a cat and a husband, all of the things. So, yes, that is life with Katie.
Yeah, oh my gosh, and what a blessing. So glad to have you here and have this conversation with you because sadly I know about addiction and you say meth. Meth is a hard one. And I have lost a friend to meth. So the addiction was bigger. That whatever she was struggling with was bigger than life. So sadly, she's not here. And then, but yeah, like tell me more about you.
So, just let me go back a little bit and I'll kind of just tell you about what growing up was like for me, a little bit about what led me to federal prison, just all of those things. I when I was young, it seemed like everything was normal, but then as I kind of got to middle school and you kind of start to notice things are just like a little bit off. That was when I started like putting together the pieces that my parents struggled with addiction, and what that looked like and how, what kind of led me to question those things is they would be gone a lot. My dad went to prison. My mom would just kind of like take off and, leave me in charge of my younger brothers and sisters when it wasn't age appropriate to do so. And so that was kind of the lifestyle that we lived. And, so I was kind of responsible for caring for these younger people, and I didn't really have any resources, and it just kind of felt really isolating. And so, creeping up in between like that middle school and high school period is when I found out that my mom struggled with meth use. And, when I found out my mom struggled, then I kind of put together the dots that my dad did also. And so for me, it was around that time that I also started drinking and smoking pot just as like a way to cope with the situation, just with life in general. And what I wanted more than anything else, I just wanted my mom to like be there. I just wanted to have a relationship with her. I wanted her to not just run away from us all the time. And so for me, in my, adolescent brain, the way to connect with her was to do what she was doing. And so when I was 15, I asked her if I could get high with her. And she said yes. And so that was the first time that I ever did meth, is when I was 15. And so, I'm doing it with a whole bunch of people that are older than me. And and most of the people that I'm using with are shooting up. And so within a couple weeks of trying it, I was already shooting up, and it just became a lifestyle really quick for me. It did in some ways connect me to my mom, but in some ways it completely took our relationship to a point of no return. There was a lot of damage done there, because as much as I wanted to do that with her, there was that part of me that wish she would have told me no and
Yeah.
wanted more for me. So, that started a cycle of resentment there as well. But that was the lifestyle that I knew. And so for me, it was getting high for as long as I could until I would get in trouble and be forced to, go to a boot camp or, a treatment center for adolescents, just kind of that cycle. And it went on until I was an adult. And when I was an adult, I got arrested for my first time when I was 19. And for me, that was scary. And also it took me away from everything for 6 months. I was in jail for 6 months. And, then you kind of really tell who actually cares about you, because those are the people that come visit you. Those are the people that support you. And it wasn't my mom, and it wasn't the people that I was getting high with. It was, my grandparents, who had always kind of been there in the background trying to like push me in the right direction. And it was like the few good friends that I had. And so I realized I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I don't want to grow up to be like my mom. I don't want to continue this life cycle that she's had. I think I can do better. Um, and so that was a point when I knew that I didn't want to do drugs. It definitely wasn't the point when I was able to stop doing drugs. I got out of jail and ended up in a relationship with a guy who also wanted to not use drugs. And I really quickly became dependent on him, because I'd never really like done life on my own. I'd come from this dysfunctional family. I didn't really feel like I had any skills. I like bills and just like daily tasks were so overwhelming to me. So I really latched onto this guy, and he was charming, and we connected really well. And so um when he went back to using, I desperately tried to get him to not use, but it was kind of like if you can't beat him, join him type situation, because it was just too much for me to think about losing him. And it was kind of like me
Yeah.
repeating that same pattern over again. And I'm using with him to stay connected because I didn't want to be left alone again. And so we did that cycle for about 9 years. That last year that we were together, we had both been doing pretty good. And we decided that we were going to try to have kids. We found out, after a year of doing infertility treatments, they said, this obviously isn't working. It's time to talk about other options. And so I took a pause and I looked at our relationship and what was going on. And I was still desperately like, all right, what's the next steps? What are we going to do? And
Hmm.
then I was like, oh, well, actually, like, he's using again and he's cheating on me. And like all of these things are happening. Why am I still pushing so hard to make this relationship work? I need to get out of here, because I'm going to just do the same thing over again. So I left him, got my own place. It was right around this time that I was graduating with my bachelor's degree and working at a treatment center. And I just fell apart. Like, I was struggling with grief over the loss of this relationship. I was struggling with, grief over not being able to have kids. I didn't really see much like of a future for me. So it was like having a drink here or there again. And then that quickly led to me calling him up one day again and getting high with him. And I was like, I panicked. I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? So I packed up my entire apartment. I moved across the state. I moved back home to where my family was. And this was 24 hours, within 24 hours of getting high again. Like, I'd packed up my whole place and just like had it out. I'm like, I can't do this again. But I got
Wow.
back home and my family was still using, I just didn't have the support there either.
Oh
And
no.
I'd never taken that time to build that support outside of him. I just really depended on him. And so I was just hurting so bad. And I was like, well, you know what, honestly, at this point, screw it. Like, what is there to stay sober for? Like, I've been working really hard and everything is still falling apart. But at this point, I'm 29. It's like I can't couch surf anymore. Like, nobody wants a 29-year-old like showing up and crashing on their couch and not having a home to go to. And so, at that time I made this decision, which seemed like a really smart decision. And I was going to sell drugs, and that was going to enable me to be able to, support myself. And it was the first time in my life that I ever felt truly in control and capable. And so it came from this really terrible thing. But for me, it felt like a really safe place for the first time in my life where I didn't need anybody, because everybody that I tried to attach to was so unhealthy for me. And so within 6 months of going back to using and starting to sell drugs, I got my door kicked in. And I was getting arrested and getting charged with federal charges for conspiracy to distribute 500 grams or more of methamphetamine. And so that is a charge of that carries a mandatory minimum of 10 years. And
Wow.
so as soon as they came and arrested me and gave me my indictment, like, it just brought me to my knees. Like, I thought that I was just going to be walking in the door of that jail and not leaving until, 8.5 years later, when your 85% of 10 years was done. And I was scared. I was really like faced with what that would mean for me. And so I I ended up talking to my lawyer the next day, and she's like, well, we're going to try to get you out on pretrial release, and that way you could go home until you went to trial. And she's like, but I'm not very hopeful. And so, just because of the choices that I'd been making. However, because I had gone to school and because I had been using for a short period of time, and because I did have some protective factors, they did decide to let me out. And when I walked out that door, like, I just swore to myself, I'm like, I can't mess around. I've gotten myself into a really bad situation, and I need to get myself out of this situation, whatever that looks like. And so I had a year before I got sentenced. And in that time, I got a job. I went back to school for my master's and started on that process. I really just like started addressing all of the things that I'd been unwilling to look at before. I started building up a healthy support network. And I met and married my husband. And I think that there was like always that thing in that back of my mind that thought if I did enough that they wouldn't send me to prison. But as it turns out, they did. um, so I ended up only getting sentenced to 5 years. And so I served just under 3 of those 5 years in prison. And that in itself was just quite the experience. And so then you get out, and the experience of being an inmate is it just is really like taxing on your soul, because you're not looked at as an individual. You're looked at as somebody who messed up and who isn't worthy of getting to know, isn't worthy of respect. And so, getting out and like even thinking about going to work and just like kind of just like walking everywhere with your head held low. And so just rebuilding from that, but knowing that I wanted to go back down the route of helping people. I wanted to get back into this place where I could use my experience and everything that I'd been through and make it worth it by giving that to somebody else. And so, I just worked really hard to do all the right things to get back on track. And it was a really difficult time period for me. But, when I didn't want to get back into helping other people right away. But, when I was ready, I remember started to reach out, and people just, I had a lot of doors shut in my face, because I had this 3-year gap in employment. I had this federal charge. But then I met with Face It Together, the organization that I work for now. And in my interview, I just was really honest with them about everything. And I just remember them saying, like, you have such amazing experience. You would be able to help so many people.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember thinking at that point, if I don't get this job, I don't think I'm ever going to be the same, because this is where I need to work. They made me feel so valued. And so I really carried that with in wanting to help other people that walk in the door, like being able to feel valued for their experience rather than, just that shame that comes along with
Yeah.
addiction, or, having a loved one who has addiction.
Yeah, no, I get it. Your life is like, wow, there's a lot going on, and I am so
Oh.
sorry for the grown-ups that failed you, as a little girl. I wish you had had more love and support then. I can relate to that. I told you, dysfunctional in family. I have grandma and two uncles that lost their battle to alcohol.
Mm.
So, and one of them, it was like serious drugs too, but I was a kid, so I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And not funny, but it's funny now. When he will detox, my mom was the monster
Uh,
because my mom wouldn't give him money for his addiction. My mom will
mm,
feed him, but she would not give him $5. So every time that he detox, she was the monster. So it was a scary situation. And when it comes to that, to my childhood, so I can relate to having dysfunction, but my mom fought the alcohol route, and
yeah.
she didn't want to be like her mom. She doesn't, out of 11 kids, only one sees her as an abusive grandma and alcoholic, and everybody else sees her as a wonderful woman that had 11 kids. So I'm sorry, she had a right to be an alcoholic because that was a lot, and an abusive husband on top
Oh,
of it.
yeah.
So that
Yeah.
woman went through a lot. So my mom didn't want to fight, give in into alcohol because she's seen what it does. Now it comes
Mm-hmm.
to me because I had both sides, the ones that didn't used it as a coping mechanism, and the ones that were like, no, I'm not going to go down that route. So
Mm-hmm.
thankfully my mom was that. But then coming over here as a teenager with my biological father, then that was the monster for me. But I was
Mm.
still as a young age, so I can relate to having both sides not doing what they were supposed to do. So just as a little girl, for Katie, I just want to say, little Katie, I am so sorry that you didn't have the love and support, but I am so glad that you came out of it
Mm-hmm.
and got rid of the shame and guilt.
Mm-hmm.
The shame of what you did in the past is in the past, and it doesn't make you the person that you are. It doesn't say that you are that person today.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, your story is going to help out so many. And I'm glad that, because we need more brave people in the world telling the story and say, hey, I have been through my darkest days. I have made some dumb ass decisions, but I am making myself better every day. Now I
Mm-hmm.
use that to help me to help others. And your story is gonna help out so many. Like, I'm talking to you and I'm just like, oh my gosh, girl, you're amazing.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. And the thing that just kept like rumbling around through my mind when you were talking about that piece is, we go through that trauma, we go through all this stuff, we make the bad decisions, we do all of those things. And I think as a society, we focus on all the bad things that come out of that. And all of the like trauma pieces that we carry with us. But I think like I don't know if it's the same for you, but I know for me, like some of the things that I really excel at came to me because of the fact that I went through those things. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm empathetic and I'm able to read a situation and I can understand like what people are going through. And I feel like I'm street smart, and I
Mm-hmm.
picked up a lot of things that I wouldn't have had I not gone through that trauma. And so really, there are I've had to work through a lot of things,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know that I would trade it in because of the depth that it gave me
Yeah.
also.
No, 100%. On my last interview, he was talking about his mental health diagnosis, and now
Mm-hmm.
with you is because of trauma, so I can relate on both, and we were all agreeing on the same thing. Like, it makes us who we are. Like, our past or things that we struggle with is like our superpower, because it
Mm-hmm.
gives us a different perspective on the world, and we treat people different because of the stuff that we have gone through. And I like the second chances. I can't
Mm-hmm.
imagine like coming out of prison. I'm pretty sure that you felt like, no, nobody's ever gonna give me a chance. I'm done. This is it. My life is over. And look at you now, like, oh, thriving. I love that.
Yes, I'm definitely grateful to be where I am. It's been a journey, and that's mostly what I hope to do, is just help people know that, like, struggling with addiction isn't the end of your journey. There's more. We can close that cycle and we can move on.
Yeah. And it's not pretty, it's not easy, but it's you can do it.
Mhm.
So yeah, where can my listeners find you? Do I have a website?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the best way to find me, or rather Face It Together, the organization that I work for, is at wefaceit.org. Um, so our website is really cool. We have a lot of information just about addiction, about, loved ones who support those with addictions. We have information about me and all of the coaches that we have here. And it's also just a great way to get in touch with us. So we have our phone number listed there and our email address, but we also just have like the online submission form. So you can just fill it out and we will reach back out to you. So whether it's, questions in wanting help for your own addiction, or wanting help because you're supporting somebody with addiction, or even just questions about any of that, um, just being able to reach out to us, we're happy to help with any of those things. And um, yeah. So that's the best way to find out a little bit more about me and the work that I do.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you so much for coming on the show today and being so brave and sharing your story and, you know, helping out others.
Perfect. Yes, thank you so much for having me. That means a lot.
Awesome. Well, hope you enjoyed this episode. And you can find my podcast in all major platforms as well as my YouTube channel. You know the drill. Like and subscribe and share with your friends. Hope you have a blessed day.